Hello and welcome to Bovine Banter podcast with Penn State Extension Dairy Team. I'm Angela Brenneman, Dairy Management Educator for Lancaster County, and today I'll be your host. Rumen development dictates the future of a calf. It's critical for digestion of grains and forages and for growth and nutrient absorption. Proper rumen development also, in part, controls their lifetime potential for milk production. It is especially true for calves being raised for organic purposes. Proper rumen function is vital for organic operations as it helps them effectively digest the abundant fiber sources that are being offered. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Judd Heinrichs, a longtime Penn State faculty member and pioneer in calf research and rearing protocols. Join me as we discuss with Judd about how to achieve proper rumen development in calves and why it's so important. Judd, welcome to our podcast. I am excited to have you here. How are you today?
Well, thank you very much, Angela, for having me. It's great. Except the sun isn't shining here in central Pennsylvania where I am, but it seems like it doesn't a whole lot these days.
Yeah, same here.
The area of rumen development is always been an interesting one. There's been a lot of research done over the last 100 years on rumen development. We did a little bit of research to fill in a few pieces maybe 15, 20 years ago. But the whole concept of rumen development is interesting for the calf in that they're born as a monogastric. The only functional part of their four stomach compartments is their abomasum, so that they're effectively a monogastric. The rumen, reticulum, omasum are just not developed at all. And they do very well on milk, like any monogastric would. So we feed them milk for a while. But the bottom line is they're going to turn into a ruminant at some point. We want them to be a ruminant because they're meant to digest forages and grains. And so developing that rumen is a good thing to do. It's going to happen sooner or later just because the calf is exposed to eating some forages, eating some grains, and it moves along. And by 5 months, maybe the end of four, maybe 6 months for some, they will have a well-developed rumen. However, with our management, up until they have a developed rumen, we have to feed them milk. They have to get a lot of their nutrients based off of milk, which is number one, expensive, and number two, it's very labor consuming. The third thing we always have to remember with milk feeding, as long as you have a calf on a milk diet, they're much more susceptible to digestive upsets. And so you get
Mm.
more scours. So there's a little bit of a health reason to get that rumen well developed also. And that's really because once you get that rumen so well developed, you've got billions and billions of bacteria and microbes in there. And so if a calf eats something that might cause some digestive upsets like it would in a simple stomached animal, it has to get those bacteria have to get through the rumen and they can't.
Hmm.
So that rumen becomes basically a way to eliminate the bad bacteria and just allow the correct stuff to get down into the GI tract. So we've got those varieties of reasons. When we're developing a rumen, we want to do it primarily so that that ruminant can digest forages. But the
Yep.
interesting thing is it's grain that develops a rumen faster than forages. And so that part of it seems a little intuitively backwards, but it works. And to explain a little of the science behind it is that you basically the calf uses the energy it's getting from glucose in its blood system to grow all the tissues in the body. But interestingly, the cells in the developing rumen have an affinity for butyric acid.
Hmm.
And so when the rumen makes butyric acid, it can get absorbed directly into the cell wall of the rumen and allow that to grow at a faster rate. It doesn't get into the general circulation, so it doesn't get up to the liver to get made into glucose.
Hmm.
So when I feed something that makes more butyric acid, it grows the rumen faster. When I'm tired of feeding liquid feed and it's expensive, I want to grow that rumen faster, get them onto grain, get them onto forages. So that's the interesting part of it is I want to develop that rumen faster. And the The thing that makes butyric acid is sugar and starch.
Mhm.
It's not forage. And that's why grain, which has sugars and starches in it, more likely, will develop the rumen faster. And so that's kind of the fundamental thing behind it. Now we know some grasses have, and early spring grasses have high levels of sugars and that
Right.
do really well.
Yeah.
In fact, I was thinking for about 20 years, I helped teach a 1 week class at the University of Costa Rica, Central America.
Oh.
They don't feed much grain there because number one, grain isn't available. Number two, it's really expensive because they don't grow it there. They have to ship it in primarily
Mhm.
from the US. But they can feed calves some of their lush forage. It's about the consistency of what we say would be lawn clippings. And it's really high in sugar and
Okay.
it develops a rumen.
Mm.
So, it can work, but it's a limited thing for us. Once we get to this time of year, for sure in Pennsylvania, we don't have high levels of sugars in our
Right.
forages, and so we don't get the butyric acid.
Right. Yeah, and that I always say it's a good balance, right? There's a lot of different calf programs out there, and there's a lot of different theories on how to feed calves. We see some really heavy milk being fed. We see forages being fed really early, but it all depends on the calf, right? And it all depends on balance. And the goal is to get that rumen developed and the sugars and the butyric acid that it needs so that it can go on to digesting those fibers more effectively,
Right,
eventually
right,
in the future, right?
right. And the other interesting thing with the milk feeding that you just made me think of is the more milk you feed, the more energy you get from milk,
Hmm.
the less energy they have a desire to get from anything else.
Right.
So there's this constant balance of how much milk do you feed versus how much primarily grain are you going to get into them. And of course, then you get more and more grain into them, and then sooner or later the rumen gets bigger in size. That's also part of it. And so then they eat more forage. The size is part of it. The critical one for anybody is we need to grow the calves bigger so that they have more physical size to digest, to hold the forage to digest them, just because they are slow to digest.
Yeah. So we know that rumen development is crucial, right, for digesting fibers. We think about mature cows, we think about the four compartments, and the rumen is the fermentation vat. That is its job, right? So how crucial is it in the beginning? Is there a time frame that we want to get this rumen developed for? Is it eventually just going to happen? Does it benefit us to get it done quicker? What are kind of the mechanics behind that?
It's going to happen sooner or later. As I said, by 6 months, they're going to have a developed rumen, but all the while you have to feed milk. And milk is expensive and labor, takes a lot of labor. So the goal is kind of always been to let's get those calves weaned at a reasonable time. Let's not feed them too much milk so that we get more grain intake. And so it's kind of a catch 22. We know we can grow them faster on milk. If you want a
Hmm.
huge calf, you feed it a full bucket of milk until it's 6 months of age, and you got a great big calf.
Yeah.
And then you take it to the county fair, and it does well. But there's no economics to that, and it's pretty time consuming.
Yeah.
So we want to, I have always said, there's 100 different ways to feed calves, and I know that. But
Yes.
my recommendation is try to wean them by 6, 7, 8 weeks at the most. And a lot of people are weaning a little later than what they used to, but I always say never feed them more than six quarts a day.
Hmm.
But I realize a lot of people feed more than that, and that's their, prerogative, and it works. But the other interesting thing that from the physiology standpoint is when I'm feeding milk to a calf, and as long as I feed milk, the lactose gets absorbed, goes to the liver, and gets made into glucose. And it's a
Hmm.
pretty decent process. However, once I get the rumen developed and I'm making acetic, propionic, and butyric acid, they also go to the liver and get made into glucose. And the system has to evolve in the liver to make that change going from lactose to VFAs to making sugar. But the VFA production of getting glucose in the liver is more efficient,
Mhm.
which is how we get 100 and whatever pounds of milk from our lactating cows. They have to produce a lot of glucose to do that.
Yeah,
It's because the liver is super efficient at doing that. And so the quicker we get that process going, the quicker the calf is going to take off and grow.
yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why people find that you wean a calf, and it's a standard thing. You get a calf at 4 months of age, she's been weaned, and all of a sudden she's grown like crazy.
Mhm.
And we were trying to get a few extra ounces a day gain early on with our milk feeding, and yet now we're getting, half a pound increase, and it's because her metabolism is so efficient.
Yeah, everything's shifting.
Yeah.
So grains are important for rumen development. How soon should we offer grains, starter grains to calves?
See, I say you can never do it soon enough. I mean, we usually try putting a little grain in there mainly to tease them the first week, and we always recommend that, or I always did. However, I know fully well that until about 2 weeks of age, they're not going to eat much. Uh,
Yeah.
in fact, you have to be careful it doesn't get moldy or, cause some issues of palatability before that. But by about 2 to 3 weeks of age, they start nibbling a little bit because they're curious and they're also a little bit hungry. Then we back off our milk a little bit by 4 weeks, and so when you back off in one energy source, they're going to take over the other. And but they should be eating noticeable amounts of grain by 4 or 5 weeks. If
Okay.
they don't, that's when you teach them.
Yeah. I feel that's always when they started, like you said, by 2 to 3 weeks is when they started to get more curious as well. And once they figure out, hey, this is food and I can eat it, they've always picked up pretty quickly.
Yeah. I always made a joke. In fact, I had a good slide for it. Calves innately know how to suckle when they're born. That's
Hmm.
part of their innate response. They just do it.
Yep.
Not 100%, but 99 point something do. Once in a while, one doesn't.
Yeah, m most of them get it.
Yeah. The other things calves innately know how to do is nibble what's on the ground. So I've always said, if you don't want to teach that one calf in 10 that doesn't understand the stuff in the bucket is what they're supposed to be eating, then put your calf starter on the ground
Hmm.
and use it as bedding, and they'll nibble it faster. Now, no one will ever use calf starter or calf grain as bedding. I understand
Yeah.
that, but
Yeah.
it kind of made people laugh because you realize that, yeah, okay, it's innate. They know to nibble what's on the ground, and that's what they do in Central America is they nibble that grass that's on the ground, and that's a normal thing.
Yeah. This just made me think this is a question that I get often asked, and I think this is super important. But water. What are your thoughts on offering calves water? How soon should we offer calves water? And how important is water to the rumen and to the development?
Well, water is super important because you're feeding a dry grain into that rumen. They have to have some water in there with it. Again, we usually always say get water available right after birth. If you get a calf that drinks a lot of water, though, you can get in trouble with that right after birth because they dilute the milk effectively.
Uh-huh.
So you really don't want water intake of any amount until again that 2 to 3 weeks of time period. But by then they need to understand what that is, and they need to be drinking it every day.
Yeah. I oftentimes, if I see customers on heavy milk diets. Sometimes I will find they'll say, oh, they don't need water because they're getting so much liquid nutrition. But I just think it's still important to know that calves always need water. There always needs to be water there available to them, especially like you said, after that 2 to 3 week point.
In fact, the interesting thing that was, gosh, this is like old research, but you take on milk, something that has the sights and sound, the smells of milk, and it bypasses the rumen and goes into the abomasum to be
Hmm.
digested, which is normal.
Hmm.
Uh, if you wait 20 minutes and the esophageal groove has opened back up, you give them water, it ends up in the rumen.
Hmm.
So that's one of the things, the little nuances with water feeding is that when you get done with milk feeding, don't immediately put water in front of the calves. Wait 20 minutes.
Hmm.
My expression was always go do the cleanup from the milk feeding and then come back and feed your water and grain. And by then the esophageal groove has opened back up and it'll go in the rumen where we want it.
Yeah, Judd, I think you had mentioned that one time in an article when I was in college at undergrad, and my now husband and I had graduated together, and we came back to his family farm after graduation, and we started a calf rearing program at home because we had previously sent them out to a custom heifer raiser, and that was one of the things that we implemented. We fed milk, and then we went and fed grain to older animals, and then came back and fed water and grain about 30 minutes later. So
Yeah.
that's something that we still do to this day. So I
Okay.
agree. I think that's
Yeah.
very important.
And there is no question that a calf that is fed water will consume more forage and grain than a
Hmm.
calf that's not fed water. There's flat out there's no argument on that one. It does make a difference.
Yeah, and there was actually a study that was published. I'd have to go back and look to see who published it, but they looked at calves and they gave calves water and not water, and they actually found that calves that drank water actually drank more milk and consumed more grains when they were offered free choice water 24/7. I just can't harp on enough how important it is to give calves water,
Yeah.
especially
Yep.
during the summer months here in Southeast PA when we're getting kind of warm.
Yep. Absolutely.
So, Judd, if we think about a calf feed, what are we going to look for in a calf feed nutrition wise? I mean, there's lots of different options that we have available to us these days. There's, we're fortunate down here in Southeast PA to have a variety of feed mills, a variety of feed companies, but it's not like that everywhere. So, what are kind of the basics, or what are the importance that we're looking for in a calf feed?
Basically, something that's about, I usually say closer to 20% protein, but 18 to 20% protein for a calf starter is good. It needs lots of starch, lots of energy, and big thing is palatability. Now, if they're not offered any forage, you've got to have some sort of a fiber source in it, but most calves are offered some forage, so that's not a real issue. And it's any starch. It doesn't need to be corn. It doesn't need to be oats. It doesn't need to be wheat. It's just anything that's a starch, whatever's available. And the processing of it is up to you. There's a lot of producers around the world that feed whole grains to calves, and it works very well. The calf digests differently than an adult cow. So I can feed whole grains to a calf and they don't make it through the rumen. They get chewed and crunched, and calves actually will ruminate on whole corn or whole wheat. It's kind of funny. The one that I don't recommend feeding whole is barley, and that's a
Okay.
palatability thing because the shape of the grain, it tends to be a little bit bitey. And so
Okay.
if they don't like it as well, that one might need to be rolled or flaked or something. But in terms of most of the other grains, they can be fed whole, depend on, what's available.
Okay. And what about texture? Do you have a preference on texture, or should there be anything that we should stay away from?
If you're feeding pelleted calf starter, they need some forage, like 5% of their
Okay.
diet should be forage of some sort because they are ruminant and they do need to, that actually helps develop their papillae.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only because a pelleted calf starter or any feed has to be ground fine in order to get through the pellet mill.
Mm-hmm.
But the good side of that is that there's no sorting. Any
Mm-hmm.
vitamins, minerals, whatever else you want to have in that calf starter is going to be in that calf starter. If it's a textured calf starter, it probably will have some molasses or something on the outside to help hold all that stuff together. And again, the molasses is a sugar, so it helps with rumen development. So there's
Mm-hmm.
nothing wrong with that. And in fact, a lot of pelleted calf starters have dried molasses in it. for
Hmm.
the same reason. It's a taste. And so either one really works well. Or, you've got three choices: whole grains, pelleted, or textured. And a lot of calf starters will have a combination of those. Some places in the US that a farmer buys a pellet and then mixes their own homegrown corn with it.
Hmm.
So you look at the calf starter and it's third pellet and two-thirds corn.
I have
You
seen
know,
that also. Yeah.
it works well.
Yeah. Sometimes we see if conventional calf starters aren't available for purchase, we will have people that make their own. And I think that can work wonders as long as we have the basics that we need in there. Sometimes we will see that when ingredients are limited, we'll have a meal form type calf feed that's being fed. What are your thoughts on that? I've seen it both ways. I've seen it work really well, and sometimes I sit there and say, I'm not really sure how this is working so well in this
Yeah.
program. And then I've seen it not work really well on farms. So what kind of are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's kind of how it's made. If anything that's dry and dusty isn't real palatable for the calf. The other problem can be, again, how it's made and ground. You can have sifting and sorting it as it moves around in the bins or whatever. The vitamins and minerals get sorted out, and so the calves aren't getting a good total diet that they should, which is again how the whole industry moved to, textured feed with molasses or pelleted feed to make sure that you don't have those issues. But that doesn't mean it can't be done at home as long as you pay attention to it. But just remember, a calf doesn't early on like dry and dusty. It's
Yeah.
not as palatable. Once they're weaned, they don't care that much,
Hmm.
or they really don't. But when they're really young, it's palatability that makes a big difference.
Yeah. So switching more to looking at grass-fed production for lactating animals and, our organic and regenerative ag-based systems. A lot of times when they're in their heifer rearing process, they want to get those calves out on pasture pretty quickly or to a forage-based kind of feeding system. Are there any challenges that would be more so associated in the wet calf phase, getting ready for that grass-fed phase? Or are there any challenges that we have to think about to kind of be intuitive about rather than reactive?
Okay, well, I mean, calves on pasture, assuming you're rotating them pretty quickly, so that you know every couple days, so they move just a little bit, so they're not laying in dirty areas.
Hmm.
Um, but they can do really well, except a calf is a lot more susceptible to heat and issues related to flies and of course parasites. But flies and heat are the biggest ones that I think really affect us, that just bother the calves and then they just don't do as well.
Hmm.
Which is why we tend to have them more likely they'll have some shade. The sun too. I mean, just being out in the hot sun can be tough on them.
Hmm.
So you're dealing with a neonate there, and they need to have a little extra care. You go to some places, I'm thinking, you go to Ireland where they all calves are group fed and they're all outdoors. I shouldn't say
Hmm.
all because there's exceptions all over the place, I'm sure, but a lot of them are because they're seasonal calving, so you have lots of calves, but they get fed milk once a day,
Hmm.
and they're outdoors, and they get moved a little bit every day to keep clean, and they don't get sunshine there either.
Yeah.
So, we're not as hot as sunshine, so it doesn't bother the calves, but they can do really well on that. And the once a day feeding is one of the key things on their programs that work well, because the calf will always eat more, whether it's forage or grain, when they're fed milk once a day. Same amount
Yeah.
versus twice a day. That's one people don't like, but
Hmm.
the calf makes when I feed a calf milk, it makes a curd in the abomasum. If I feed it 3 quarts of milk, it makes reasonable sized curd and takes probably 12 hours to digest that curd. If I feed 6 quarts of milk at one time, it makes a much bigger curd and takes probably 24 hours to digest that curd. Either way, the calf is getting energy and fat and protein from that curd 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
Whether you feed a calf one, two, three, four, five, 6 times a day, it's the same.
Yeah. That's actually a good point. Because I know there definitely have been some recommendations on feeding smaller meals more frequently, but that's a good point to make.
Well,
Um,
if it's something that doesn't cause, if it's a milk replacer that has whey protein in it,
hmm
not skim protein in it, skim milk protein, then
hmm
feeding more often is going to be better. Because the way it's digested, a whey protein doesn't form a curd.
Okay.
It still gets digested well, but it just
Right.
in a different manner.
Yeah. Yeah, I was in Ireland and I was visiting farms all across Ireland, and that was definitely an eye-opening experience coming from America to Ireland to see how they not only raise calves but milking cows and grazing cows in general. That was definitely an interesting experience. A lot of mob feeders, a lot of acidified milk, a lot of cows out on pasture, even dairy or beef cattle out on pasture. So that
Yeah.
was definitely a really neat experience. Um,
And and their pasture, because of the way it grows and the amount of rain that they get, and
mhm.
it is full of sugar.
Yep.
And so when those calves are eating grass, being rotated every day or two, so it's always fresh grass, they're getting a high sugar diet. They're getting really good rumen development. So
Yeah.
it works well.
Yeah, the most luscious pasture I've ever seen and
Right.
everywhere. I mean, I don't know that I was ever in a pasture that looked poor. Even
Yeah.
grazed pasture. It was really amazing to see.
Yeah. Yeah. That's actually one step better than the ones in Central America because their grasses in Central America are a different kind of grasses, and so the fiber digestibility is lower. The fiber
Mm.
digestibility of the stuff in Ireland is amazing.
Is yeah, really high passage rate. Yeah. We know we need milk. We know we need some type of grain in there to get some rumen development started. How do we know then that we achieved proper rumen development or that a calf is ready to move on to forages? Is there some telltale signs that we can look for, or what should we be basing off of? Okay, now our calf is ready for the next step.
There's really no telltale way to do it with a live calf.
hmm
Uh, it's just that if you know, if you were to look at the rumen, you could see what was on the inside. You could tell what's going on. But basically, once that calf has been eating a pound or two of grain for 3 weeks, it's got to develop rumen. That's
Okay.
all there is to it. And they're growing, and that's a lot of it is their growth rate is keeping up there because once they've made that switch to the liver utilizing acetic propionic and butyric acid, I mean their efficiency just goes way up.
hmm
And so they're growing real good. And some people just have a an affinity for liking to feed calves milk, and so they feed them longer and longer and longer. And it doesn't hurt the calf at all. It just costs a little more money and time, but
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I was going to mention. So when we have high volume milk programs, that's the other piece to that. It's going to take a little bit longer to get those calves really fully on grain and to get that rumen developed. So that takes a lot longer of a time when you're feeding a program that's high volumes of milk. So I always like to caution people with that too. If we're feeding high volumes of milk, we can't be weaning at that starting our weaning process at that 6 week time period,
yeah, yeah.
just to make sure that they're able to digest those fibers and those forages effectively then.
The
And
other thing early on that people need to understand, though, is that the volume of the rumen is small at birth, and
hmm
you can't do anything about that. That's just the way it is. It's going to have to grow. So, feeding a more concentrated diet like grains versus forages is going to get us more energy into the calf, more protein, and everything else, so I can have faster growth rates. So,
yeah,
again, you want a faster growth rate so that I can get more forage into the calf later on, but it takes kind of grain to do that early on.
hmm energy density and kind of
Yeah,
more bang for our buck, right? Yeah.
right.
We do also know that if we don't necessarily get proper rumen development, we can see some health effects to the calf. I just want to make a note of this that, like you said, eventually we are going to see rumen development. It may take longer. I just wanted to take note with operations where we cannot use antibiotics. We can't use types of conventional treatments that we normally would. What does the rumen serve in terms of providing some part of health benefits to the calf? What's I guess, the importance of making sure that we're getting that rumen developed and that calf is eating correctly for what stage of life that it's in terms of health effects?
It's a couple things. One is the fact that you've got this large volume of microbes in there. And so when a calf does eat something that it shouldn't, some dirty bedding, some whatever else, and you don't worry about the bacteria that are in that because they'll never get past the rumen. Or you take a monogastric animal, or which is also a calf that hasn't, been weaned, the rumen isn't fully functional, and so those bacteria can get in the small intestine and causes problems, usually related to scours.
Hmm.
So there's definitely a health effect there to having that rumen well developed. But it also means that the calf is growing well and eating more and just all around doing better with a well developed rumen, which is gonna allow her to be healthier.
Hmm. I always tell my customers and the people that we work with, if we have a healthy calf, they have a healthy rumen, right? Or they have a
Right,
healthy digestive tract. And when they don't, we can open them up to other issues. It's sort of like a chain effect, right? Because
right,
normally if they
right.
don't have a healthy rumen, they're not eating well. If they're not eating well, that affects other body processes and leaves them open and weaker to other diseases that could also affect them as well. So just wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of that, especially if we're thinking about production where for scours we can't be using antibiotics. If there aren't conventional tools that we can use to help treat those animals, we're probably going to be experiencing more loss in that instance then, which doesn't help our milk cow herd for in terms of replacement. It also doesn't help our paychecks, right?
Right, right.
And our bottom line. Judd, is there any other outstanding messages that you want to give to dairy producers about the importance of rumen production or about calf rearing and raising calves?
Not really, other than, I mean, the big thing is we want that calf to get growing because we want her to be large enough to breed at a reasonable time, and we'd also like her to calve pretty consistently close to 2 years of age. I prefer 23 months, but we have to keep them on a good growth plane, and we can't slow them down the first 3, 4 months of life by not having a well-developed rumen. And part of that is not offering too much forage. That ratio of forage to concentrate is always a key one, just because forage takes longer to digest and the
Hmm.
rumen is smaller. So we've got this trade-off there. I know forages are going to be cheaper and they're what she was designed to digest, but you got to get the grain into them earlier so that they can get the rumen to function. So I think a little bit of grain is going to be a good investment early on to get that calf growing. That's just the key one.
Not that forages are bad and not that we don't want to not feed forages. Obviously, we want to, but the balance is key.
Right, yeah. I mean, your goal is to get that rumen large enough and the heifer doing well enough that I don't need more than a half a pound of grain a day into them.
Yeah,
But that doesn't always happen with Pennsylvania forages. We don't always have the super high quality, but that's what we'd like to have, and that's what we strive for. So,
right. Well, Judd, thank you so much for joining us today and talking a little bit about rumen development and how to grow some dairy calves. I am super glad that we got to have this conversation. Like I said, I've spent many years reading your articles and your studies, and I specifically remember, pictures of rumens of calves being fed milk and hay and grain, and I still use those pictures today. I think that is just the foundation of how we raise calves. So thank you for taking time to chat with me today. I learned a lot from this conversation too. Just to
Thank
kind
you.
of recap of what we talked about calves need milk, they need grain, they need forages, but it's about balance and how we offer them to calves. The biggest thing is we want intakes and making sure that they're getting that green into them to develop that rumen for the benefits of the rumen development. Forage is definitely an available option for calves, but we just have to make sure that we're providing them a balance between grain and forage intake as well. Any other points to take away from that conversation for you, Judd?
Not really, although you make me think of with the economics of the times, I'm glad that we did all that rumen development research where we, good, bad, or indifferent, we had to slaughter a lot of calves in
Hmm.
order to take pictures of the rumens. And I was buying bull calves at 30, 40, $50 a piece for
Times
that
have
research.
definitely
And
changed,
I
haven't they?
wouldn't be doing that today.
Yeah. Yeah, times have definitely changed. But no, I'm certainly glad that you did that research. And I think as dairy producers, I mean, a lot of times we see the outside characteristics of the calf, not necessarily what's happening on the inside. I mean, we don't want to, right? Because that usually means that our
Right.
calf is no
Right.
longer
It
with
means
us. I think it's just super beneficial for us to get to see a snapshot of what's happening on the insides. We're happy that you did that research for us. Judd, I know you're in the retirement phase. Judd is having lots of trips and traveling. He's not around too much often anymore, but if you have any questions on anything calf care related or calf nutrition, you can contact myself at the Lancaster County Extension office at 717-394-6851. You can contact anyone on the dairy team as well who can get any type of information. And we have lots of Judd research and lots of Judd articles that we can share with you. Judd, thanks for joining us today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, even though the sun is not shining here either. Hopefully you can get out and do some things that are fun this afternoon.
Well, thank you so much for asking me.